Live on WFLA now. Feel good and live your best life with Bloom Health Club. Here's Gayle Guyardo.
Here's a question for you. Can frugality actually be fun? Could you survive a no-spend challenge? Today we're talking dollars, cents, and saving big time with the dynamic duo behind the hit Frugal Friends Podcast, Jen Smith and Jill Sirianni. They're here to prove that budgeting does not have to be boring. Ladies, welcome to the Bloom Health Club.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
And I'd also like to introduce you to Nacha Castillo. She is our producer. She's going to be switching the show today and jumping in with a few questions. But I guess the big question is, how did you guys even get into this?
Well, I wanted to do something outside of writing. I was a full-time writer at the time, and I did not want to do a podcast.
Yet here we are.
Right. But Jill's husband and I had met several years before, and he wanted to get into podcast producing, podcast editing. And so he was the one that suggested we start a podcast together. And I was like, Jill's not in personal finance space. I don't want to start a podcast, but we'll do it a couple episodes so you can get some kind of portfolio. And that was 7-8 years ago, and we have not missed a week since.
That is incredible. So talk to me about how it's evolved, Jill, like how you guys have taken your financial advice and brought it out to the everyday listener. Because when you talk financial health, most people immediately check out.
Mm-hmm. A lot has shifted over the last 7 years of us having this podcast. And you'll find that if you go back into our archives and listen to some of our earlier episodes, we talk about frugality in a way that we don't anymore. Not that we've made an entire shift in our ideology, but really looking at frugality as being good stewards of all of our resources. So thinking physical, mental, emotional, relational, and financial health. And so for me, my background is in social work, which is why Jen thought, why in the world would you do a finance podcast? But to realize that the two do go hand in hand really with all other aspects of our personhood. And when we can find well-being in one area, it can trickle into all the other areas of our lives. And so as we've evolved, so has our ideology a bit about how we can really embrace spending, how debt is neutral, how this isn't a race to the bottom, but really finding what can a values-driven lifestyle and spending plan look like, and how can we make it fun and not boring. That part has been with us since the beginning. It's got to be fun.
And you actually came up with something called a no spend challenge, which is actually how I met the both of you, because my daughter, my 27-year-old, took that challenge and loved it, loves your podcast. Now she's got her hands on your new book that's out. But tell me about the no spend challenge.
Yeah, I did no spend challenges while my husband and I were paying off $78,000 of debt over 2 years. And so I did it several times to get a grasp on my spending and to save money. The first time I did it was just to spend money. But what I learned was that the thing that stuck with me and really helped me more than that couple $100s I saved was what I learned about my habits. So I learned all kinds of things about how I was buying food, just passing by the Chipotle or the Starbucks and then finding myself in the drive-thru and not knowing how I got there. So I was learning all these things. So I wrote a book and I self-published that called the No Spend Challenge Guide. And that's what really started my professional writing journey in the personal finance space. But it's just been such a life changer for me, doing one now every only a couple years. But I still, every time I do one, learn something else about the way I've been spending, because habits creep up on us. Like 10 minutes a day, we were just talking about this. We think about our money maybe 10 minutes a day. But the other 23 hours and 50 minutes is all spent on our habits and our actions. And a lot of those do impact our finances, but we don't have any incentive or motivation to think critically or creatively about that. And the No Spend Challenge really does give you space to do that.
So basically, you're not spending any money other than for essentials. So no more Starbucks drive-through, no more grabbing a donut, none of that kind of stuff that you really don't need for 1 month.
Absolutely. So we're putting gas in our car. We're paying our bills. We're meeting all the obligations that we have set prior. But it's just those discretionary impulse or non-essential charges that we are pausing for 30 days so that we can think critically about them, create new habits, and get creative with how we meet our desires.
I want to go back to the psychology of money because, we talked a little bit about, Jill, you're the one that's the social worker, right?
Correct.
Okay. So Jill, there is a relationship that we have with money and it probably forms at a very, very young age. So do you kind of connect that for your listeners and your viewers?
Absolutely. It's important to understand our own story, the types of narratives that we've been told about money, how we saw our caregivers engaging with financial decisions, whether it was talked about or not talked about. We can kind of go in a variety of different directions with our spending and money decisions, depending on how we understand money, how educated we are about how to make wise financial decisions. But beyond that, there's also just an understanding of how our brains work as humans and the different cognitive biases that we have that marketers will prey upon and that social media will absolutely hook onto to try to get us to spend money. So there's a lot of factors that come into play when it comes to mental and emotional health and how that then leads to the financial decisions we make.
So talk to me about the book that you co-authored.
Yeah, it's called Buy What You Love Without Going Broke, and it released in January. And it's started as this way to write a book about spending. There are a lot of books about how to earn more, how to invest, how to do personal finance overall. But so much of investing and saving and all these things come down to how we spend money. You can't invest money that you don't have. And so many people, even in, making 6 figures a year or more, are still living paycheck to paycheck because they're spending as fast as they can earn. And so we wanted to write a book that teaches people this is how you figure out what you value spending money on, that spending is neutral. We should spend, and as we earn more, we should spend more, but it should be proportionate to getting these bigger things that we want out of life: time, freedom, house, time with family, stuff like that. And so it's about how to find what you value, spend on that, and maybe most importantly, how to say no to the things that you don't value. When you see the marketing on social media, on TV, in magazines, all of that, how do we decipher that, okay, this is something I have wanted and truly want to buy, and this is something that's kind of preying into one of my cognitive biases, and I don't really need to buy it right now.
Okay. All right. So we've started something new here on the Bloom Health Club where we play sound from experts who have appeared on our show, and then we get our podcast guests to weigh in and see what they think. So our first hot take is an interview with financial planner Steve Overton. Take a look.
Let me just say, debt is not necessarily an evil thing. I mean, debt can kill you, it can hurt you. But if you're borrowing to buy something that will appreciate in value, like a house, that's good, or an investment property, or maybe a business venture, those can all be good. But where do you go to get the money? Well, you're not going to believe what I'm going to say. Do you know you can ask your mama and your daddy?
Yes.
Because they love you.
Yes.
And they're not going to be upset with you. Like if you borrow from a sibling or a cousin or a niece or nephew or an uncle, that can create all kinds of problems and tension in the family, but not with mom and dad. So there's an old adage about, borrow money from a pessimist because they don't expect to get it back anyway.
So Jen, what is your thoughts on the hot take there about freeloaders?
We actually, We actually talked with him after that taping. We were in studio that same day.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Jen chatted with him afterwards saying, you know what? We kind of like your hot take.
Yeah, it is for sure not for everyone, right? Like there is a very finite part of the population that's going to be able to do that. But I think it is healthy to consider options that may not be applicable to you, to still consider them, that they are actually options out there, that you don't always need to, and maybe it's not borrowing money for a house, and maybe it's not borrowing from a direct relative. My sister-in-law borrowed money from a family friend who just was very independently wealthy to buy a house during the 2008 recession. And so she was able to buy a house outright and pay him back interest-free. And that was such a great opportunity for her.
I still would recommend having a contract drawn up, because anytime there's
Absolutely.
money and big amounts of money being borrowed, even from family and especially from family, to have some sort of notarized contract and an agreed upon, maybe even a little bit of interest to be paid back. Maybe beat what the bank could provide.
And people do this in real estate investing too. It's called a hard money loan. So people will lend their own money out to real estate investors at a higher interest rate, but it bypasses the bank. It allows a real estate investment property purchase like it's cash, even if you don't have the cash. So it does help people get into real estate investing that way. So there are a lot of creative ways to fund the investments that you want. I think at face value, though, it is a little laughable, but you can build off of it.
So Nadja, I saw you slid in, and I am old enough to be your mom. So are you hitting me up for a home loan?
Well, I was going to ask, going back to, what Steve Overton mentioned, would you say that would be an advice to do if you borrow money from a family member, to kind of write it up in a contract? Would that make things a little bit more complicated, even if they're like, hey, I love you, you're my niece, you're my grandson, and I'll let you borrow this money, but there's a little bit of interest that comes along with that.
Oh, you should definitely charge interest. You should definitely be charged interest. It's nice if it's free and clear, but absolutely, because there can be you save a lot of money by avoiding a bank. So there should still be contracts, there should still be interest, and it can be at the user's discretion.
Everyone is an expert, though, on their own selves and their own families. So this is not to be taken as everyone should do this, but take into consideration, what are your dynamics and circumstances? What are the costs outside of the financial cost too? What will the relational cost be? What's the emotional and mental cost? So again, it's not just a math problem. And so often that's the case with money. There's so many other factors to be exploring. And so I think making a really wise decision on not hemorrhaging ourselves in that process just to be able to get that loan. Sometimes it's worth just going to the bank and doing a bank contract and paying the interest than dealing with whatever dynamics can happen with family.
Yeah, because a lot of times when you lend money, because I have 4 daughters, and I have created, when they were very young, I started to create little trust funds for them that I put money into, that when they get to a certain age, they can access, because I didn't want them to be like, irresponsible, not go out and get jobs and that kind of thing. And you can kind of start paying into that and transferring X amount of dollars into the trust fund every year for the kids. And then maybe if you see that they're responsible, then start talking about a house or how to set them up. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. In this economy, absolutely.
Yeah. It's hard. It really is so hard to get ahead in life with the economy the way it is. So if you can, as a parent, be a little bit creative and start when they're babies, just setting a little bit of money aside, prepaid Florida, whatever you do to kind of take some of the debt off of them before they face it, because debt just begins to mount.
Yeah, that's what a 529 exists for,
Right.
is to be able to help your children not deal with the same struggles that maybe we have.
Yeah, I think if you're instilling the merit-based systems early on for monetary gain, I think that you can feel safe setting up 529 trusts, those kinds of things to help, and in that case they won't hurt. I think with high wealth, like very, very affluent, I think you see more of those stories in the media, that how, those freeloaders, but It's typically not how it goes most of the time.
In the real world.
Yeah.
Okay. We've also started taking viewer questions here on Bloom. We like to call it Real Talk. So it's time to hear from people who reached out to us on social media with questions, and we're going to now pass them along to our experts. All right, the first question is, how much debt should I pay down each month?
It depends. Am I allowed to say
Yeah,
that
of
answer?
course.
Yeah. We certainly would recommend that if possible, you are paying more than the minimum. Otherwise, you're never getting out of debt. You are continuously paying the interest on that debt, on that loan. We recommend paying down high interest debt first. So that's going to be your credit cards primarily. And then from there, looking at what other debts should I be paying down in order of high interest would be most recommended. There's a couple different ways of going about it, but we recommend however much you can be putting aside towards that. Now, again, we don't believe that debt is bad. We believe it's neutral. We believe it helps us to get the education, get the house. It allows us to get things maybe that we might not be able to have access to for another decade or more. But we also recognize that it bears an emotional weight on us. It can keep us from achieving other financial goals. So to your degree of desire of getting out of debt, that degree put into some of these efforts, like doing a 30-day no-spend challenge to see what kind of margin in my spending plan can I find to be able to put towards this debt payoff. And always trying to make sure that we're paying more than that minimum payment, whatever that is.
Yeah, I'll say my story, we paid off $78,000 in 2 years, and I would have been just as happy if we'd done it in 3, and I'd gotten to live a little bit more life. In hindsight, when I was in it, all I could think about was the debt, but it also made me feel a lot of shame and guilt too. And so that was another motivator to pay it off so quickly. And I don't want people to feel that. I don't want people to feel like they're wasting their life, whether they have debt or not. So definitely setting a goal to get it done as quickly as possible, but also knowing that you don't have to put 100% of your life on hold just to get it paid off.
That's good. That's really great advice. And it wasn't what I was expecting to hear you say, but you got to find that balance. And especially, Jill, as a social worker, you can speak to this. I mean, you gotta balance your life with living it and, not being freaked out because you're living in debt. And I think that's a great way to look at it. The next viewer question is, how much of an emergency fund do I need?
So general wisdom is 3 to 6 months of expenses. If you're in a career that is quite volatile, then 6 months definitely. And if you're in a career that's more stable, you can lean closer to 3 months. But I think while you're paying off debt, having at least $1,000 to $2,000 in the bank during that time is super important. You don't have to have all 3 to 6 while you're paying off your debt. And you also don't have to have it all before you start investing either.
Okay. Next question. How soon do I have to start planning for retirement?
Today.
Now.
Yesterday.
Log in now. Create the account now.
If you are young listening to this, please now. At any age, really, it's never too soon to begin. But I also want to encourage people that it's never too late to start either. But it is a really important thing that we often don't set our minds on because it doesn't provide instant gratification. But when we get to that age of retirement, we're sure going to wish that we had done some efforts in our 20s, 30s, 40s. So whatever you can do, taking advantage of a 401k, your employer match, investing in a Roth IRA, these things are so important.
We overvalue the present and undervalue the future. We don't know if the future is going to happen. We don't know what it's going to happen in the future. And so we would rather spend $100 today and get that dopamine rush and know we got what we paid for essentially, than put it into an investment account and not be certain of what we will get back. But if you look back 10, 20, 30 years, the stock market does trend up over time, and we can't guarantee what's going to happen, but history will show us that the market has trended up. The S&P 500, which is the 500 biggest companies in the stock market, have returned 12% over the last 10 years. So if you put $100 in the stock market 10 years ago, it would be $320, $330 right now. So
Wow.
that's $220 you would not have had otherwise. And so if we just look back and take into consideration that we overestimate what we can do in a year, we underestimate what we can do in 10 years, taking a little bit more risk with where we put our gratification and where we put our dopamine.
Okay. We only have minutes left, so I'll end with a doozy. Should husbands and wives keep their finances separate and have a joint pool of money for bills, but then their own slush funds?
It's important that you agree on how you manage finances. It's important that it's talked about, that there is equity in the ways that you're approaching finances. I do personally love the idea of both partners having their own fun money, slush money, whatever you want to call it. And you can decide upon what that amount is going to be. We've said in the past, maybe 1% of your take-home income each, that you're able to make whatever decisions you want to make. You don't even need to consult the other person. It's so important to have autonomy and freedom and the ability to make some impulse decisions. It is actually tied to one of our higher level needs, the ability to be spontaneous and creative. And sometimes we're able to do that with our money. We don't want restriction and deprivation, certainly not a part of our marriage and partnerships. So it is important, yes, I'd say spend money how you want to.
I would say I don't want to be a buzzkill, but practically, if a partner dies, even if you are named as a beneficiary on the account, it will be a little bit of time before you have access to that account. So set up your beneficiaries first. But if it's a joint account, you'll still have access to the money if one of you dies. So it needs to at least be joint or have a really good amount of money in each account.
All right. I'm glad to hear your advice because my husband doesn't understand my girl math. So sometimes I like to have my own private account. But listen, thank you both for joining us. How do our viewers and listeners find you?
So we are Frugal Friends Podcast on social media, and you can find us Frugal Friends wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube.
All right, guys. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.